Ofir Haivry is Vice President for Academic Affairs of the Herzl Institute and the Director of its National Strategy Initiative. He served in executive positions at the Sholem Center in Jerusalem, including founding editor-in-chief of Sholem Press and its flagship publication, Azure Magazine. Haivry's John Selden and the Western Political Tradition, published with Cambridge University Press in 2017, offers a broad rethinking of the Anglo-American tradition of political philosophy. He is a member of the Israel Council for Higher Education and of the Public Council of the Israel Antiquities Authority. He holds a BA and MA from Tel Aviv University and a PhD from University College London. He will be speaking tonight on the Pre-Burkean foundations of the Anglo-American Conservative tradition. So with that, Dr. Haivry, you have the floor. Thanks so much for being with us.
Okay. Can you hear me, guys? Very good. Okay. So good to be with you. And I would like to start I talk to you today about what we term the Pre-Burkean conservatism. And I want to start by quoting Edmund Burke, who in his reflections on the revolution in France from 1790, he argued that his opinions were nothing new. He said that they're actually the product of a centuries-long tradition in England of constitutional and political ideas. And he mentioned in this context the names of people like Sir Edward Coke and of John Selden. So obviously, a conservative thinker is arguing that his ideas are not coming from nowhere, is the natural thing, right? I mean, if you're not conserving something, what kind of conservative are you? But the question really is serious in this case, because I don't know about how many of you have heard it, but Burke is often termed as the first conservative. So he was arguing that he's not the first conservative, that his ideas are nothing new. And actually, he's regarded, although he's regarded as the father of modern conservatism, and in some aspects that's true. On the other hand, I see him in a sense as the last conservative, meaning as the last part of a chain that people who grew in a world when the conservative outlook was the predominant view among educated Englishmen and also Americans of that time, and only afterwards, because of mainly because of the French Revolution and other ideas, conservatism became an idea that was contending with other ideas, like, in a sense, like liberalism, like socialism, and so on. So basically, the argument is that my argument is Burke's argument, basically that his conservatism, the ideas he was presenting, were the mainstream views of a long-standing English tradition about politics and law. So I'd like to go into it with a kind of a review of the history of ideas in England, and just to make some signpost about this tradition, and then I will get into the principles of this tradition of Pre-Burkean conservatism. I will start just by mentioning that by chance this lecture is happening in the week during the week in which Queen Elizabeth II died. And of course, you could see, and you can still see, all the ceremonies and traditions that goes into that that event, her death, the proclamation of the new king, and so on. And just to get you into the mind of the English way things work, the new king, Charles III, will be proclaimed his oath of office. He's hundreds of years old. And when he's anointed as king, he will be anointed with a spoon, which is, I think, something like between 800 and 1,000 years old. So I'm just giving you a sense of how much the English always had this attraction to tradition, to continue these traditions. So the interesting thing is that the English idea of law was always traditional. What I mean by this is that lawyers and the law itself regarded itself as being a result of traditional national life rather than simply the decision of some king or even an assembly. This is important to understand when we talk about English politics and the English state. And you have to understand it's also important because unlike other places, in a very important sense, the English political tradition grew out of legal institution and tradition. Meaning, in some places, you say the state, the kingdom, started by some revolution, by some conquest, by someone, and so on. In England, there isn't really such a point where you can say this guy invented the law or this assembly started the law. So it's all very traditional in content and in style, and it's a self-conscious thing. So I'll put the first pin in at the year 900 AD. Around 900 AD, so we're talking about 1100 years ago, our ruler of the West Saxons, King Alfred, united under his rule several small kingdoms and became the king of the Anglo-Saxons. There were a few Saxon kingdoms, a few Anglo-Saxons, and he was the first king of the Anglo-Saxons, and he was the first ruler of that state, which we call England. And those various kingdoms had various affinities between them in language and in culture. But Alfred was out to make them more closely one nation. And for this purpose, his most significant instrument was creating a common code of law. So when you hear the term common law, what common law means, common to all, meaning national law. The term common law means national law, basically. So Alfred created a code that drew from various traditions of various kingdoms, his own kingdom and other kingdoms. He took laws from each of them and created the code. But what's interesting that he put at the beginning of the code a set of laws that were derived almost word for word from the biblical book of Exodus. So the origins of English law were, in a sense, a combination of biblical laws with the common legal traditions of the Anglo-Saxons, and in a sense symbolizing this self-understanding. In 1882, so about 1,000 years after Alfred, the British built a new a house for the Supreme Court or all the important courts. And the building is still there in London. It's called the Royal Courts of Justice. And when they built it, they put, it has like very tall columns outside of the building. And so they put 4 statues, 3 statues at the front of the building and 1 statue at the back. You can very hardly see them from the street when you look up. So who are these statues depicting, symbolizing English law? So you have the 3 statues in the front are in the middle, Jesus Christ, on the right, King Alfred himself, and on the left, King Solomon, who symbolizes, let's say, is the symbol for good judgment. And in the back, in a sense, being the source for all 3, for King Solomon, for Jesus Christ, and for King Alfred, is Moses. So this is, in a sense, the self-understanding of English law. So this tradition of law continued for centuries in England under the successors of Alfred until the last of his line, King Edward the Confessor, died. When he died, England was invaded by William the Conqueror, a Norman. But what's interesting is that the new ruler, as well as his successors, instead of claiming that they're ruling by the right of conquest or by divine right or anything like that, they actually pledged to continue to rule according to the good laws of Edward the Confessor. And successive kings always came to that. They never said, I am the source of the law, and so on. In England, it was always accepted that tradition is the source of the law. Now, when we get to the 12th and 13th century, that is when the common law as we know it today started to emerge. The great legal treatises of the period that are known by the names of their supposed authors, maybe you heard of them, Glanville and Bracton and so on. These treatises argued that English law were traditional, unlike the Roman law, which is imposed by the ruler. English law were traditional, and the source of their authority draws from their being traditional laws. So 800 years ago, about, let's say, 400 years after Alfred, English legal writers were already aware of the unique nature of their common law when compared to continental law. So the first thing to understand is there was this argument in English law, in English tradition, that we the English have a traditional law that is very different from what's going on the continent. On the continent, they have a version of Roman law, which is imposed from above. Our way is not imposing from above. Our way is more traditional. So the next important point here is that in the following centuries, Parliament emerged. And what's interesting is that Parliament emerged originally as a judicial institution. It was regarded as the highest court in the land. And for centuries, the legislation in Parliament was understood as judicial rather than legislative, meaning the decisions of Parliament were regarded as judgments, not as legislation. The idea of legislation, statute laws, as we understand now, is relatively modern in England. In England, they regarded Parliament as simply handing out judgments. And so in this system, by the 15th century, the combination of common law and Parliament had produced a very strong self-awareness of a distinction between English political system and its counterpart in the continent. So the most famous product of this outlook were the books of Sir John Fortescue. Fortescue lived in the 15th century. Most of the century, he lived like more or less from 1400 to 1490, something like that. We don't know exactly, but that's more or less the area. And Fortescue produced a famous description of English law and constitution of his time. And his argument was interesting. He argued that there exist two two types of constitutional settings, and both are the expression of natural law. How can two types of constitution be the expression of natural law? It was because he argued that natural law adapts to local circumstances. What did he mean? He mean that basically human societies, human countries can be of two kinds. One, the regular, normal, most common type is that human society are by their nature tended to wickedness, and they're unruly, they're many times rebellious, and leading to anarchy. So according to this view, human society needs a strong ruler. And Fortescue described such societies as being ruled according to royal rule, meaning there's a king and he decides everything, because that's the only way that the society won't fall into chaos. He described Roman law and French law as this type of law. He claimed that the French were wild and unsettled people, and they will lead to anarchy and rebellion if they're not ruled by a strong hand. On the other hand, he said there's another system. In a few cases, in a few societies, so, the population is more pious and moderate in nature. And so there is a political system that fits such types of people, and that is a royal and political government, meaning a government that alongside royal rule also adds some element of political, let's say, of popular involvement in legislation and in government. And he brought as examples the biblical Israel and England. So you can see how even in Fortescue's time, let's say 500 years ago, there was this idea in England very strong that puts France and England in opposition. France as an unruly place and running to extreme that needs a strong hand to be governed, or else it becomes anarchy and chaos. And the English as moderate and considerate, and then their rule can be more, there's more room for self-rule and moderation. In a sense, we see this is very much the dichotomy that we see in Burke about France versus England. This is very much the same model that goes on. So this was Fortescue. Now, Fortescue was in a sense the culmination of English medieval law. And why was that? Because around, let's say, the year 1600, more and more discoveries and inventions were changing they were destroying the old system of knowledge, the way everything was taught in the universities. This system was called scholasticism, and it gave us a kind of worldview that apparently explained everything: physics, morality, religion, law, government. It was a Christian version of Aristotelianism, and it had a certain worldview that was accepted everywhere as established. And basically, you could go to Oxford one week, and the other week be in Paris, and the other week be in Rome. And every university you entered, you would learn the same things in the same week. It was one big system of unified knowledge. However, during the 15th and 16th century, there started to appear all kind of new information which went against this system of knowledge. One of them was, of course, the discovery of America, because Aristotelianism described the world in a certain way, and suddenly there's a whole continent that wasn't there. Then things like physics, optics, and so on, the way that Aristotelianism described the world was shattered by Galileo finding all kinds of things, and by, for instance, ideas about gravitation, where that the heavier something is, it will fall, the faster it will fall. Now, Galileo was one of those who said, let's test if this is true. He went up the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and he started to throw things down, and he found out that it's not true, that actually it's not that the heavier something is, the faster it falls. But there are other laws governing that. And every time some new discovery, put another chip into this structure of Aristotelianism, people became convinced that what was being taught at universities had a very little connection to the real world. And eventually all this theoretical worldview of scholasticism collapsed. Now, since it collapsed, all kinds of people started to invent, or trying to invent, new theories that could explain the world. Cartesianism, other theories, doesn't matter now, but a lot of theories, epistemological theories, try to describe the way that you can understand the world. Now, this was initially only something, going around university professors were debating, or people were debating how we should understand the world, how physics works, how our cognitive mind works, and so on. But everyone can understand that eventually this will impact how we understand politics, because if we think about the way we understand the world and the way we do politics, the two cannot be totally divorced one from the other. So international law, for example, worked in a certain way. Then, for instance, the Reformation was one of the elements that destroyed this scholastic system. And after the Reformation, before the Reformation, Christians had a system where Christians are one thing, infidels are another thing, and when two Christian nations fight each other, there are rules. Then suddenly, the divide between Catholics and Protestants became, in a sense, worse than the divide between, let's say, Catholics and Muslims, because both Protestants and Catholics saw each other as heretics and basically spiritual monsters, let's call it this way. So people started to ask questions like, wait a minute, so if I'm a Protestant and my country makes some treaties with a Protestant country, should we actually keep it or not? Because, according to the old law, we should have kept it, but now maybe we shouldn't. Or if we catch, if we are Catholics and we catch Protestant soldiers during war, can we sell them to slavery, and so on and so forth? So this is just one example, but many other examples were basically born out of the question. People said, I'm a Catholic, I live in a Protestant country. Should I actually listen to the orders of a king which is from another religion? Am I obliged to listen to him, or a parliament, whatever? So this question started to shatter the structure of constitutional thought, and various theories sprang up to try to offer some new system. There were many theories. I won't bore you with all of them. I will mention two of them, which probably you heard of. One is absolutism, and the other is rational individualism. Both of those theories try to create some new order that was not based on the old truths and that was not based on your religious belief, because they said, since my belief is different from that guy, we have to find some system that isn't based on my belief, because then he wouldn't listen to it. So both absolutism in its various versions and rational individualism, which gave birth eventually to liberalism, were attempts to solve this problem. Now, the common thing between both of them is that they dismiss tradition. Absolutism says you have to have some absolute power that decides everything, and its will, the king, the council, whatever, is absolute in deciding things. Otherwise, there's chaos. And according to this tradition, you cannot be hampered by some, traditional views or common law and so on. And the same with rational individualism. In rational individualism, you assume that individuals are benevolent and they can agree on law between themselves, and there's nothing to bind them to traditions. So these two outlooks were natural challenges to the common law of England, because both of them say, why do you need the common law? And indeed, absolutists and rationalists were united in thinking that traditional law, and especially the English common law, was an old curiosity, a waste of time. Why do we need it? I can mention three important things of the 17th century which had very different opinions, but were united in their eventual dismissal of the common law and of traditions. So one of them is Hugo Grotius, a very famous Dutch thinker, and today is remembered mainly as the father of modern international law. But in his own time, his importance was a political thinker who offered a theory, a system of everything, of a new kind of natural law. I will discuss this in a moment. Another thinker is Thomas Hobbes. You probably heard of him. And he, again, starting from a kind of radical individualism, built a system that is absolutist in the service of saving the life of this individual. And again, Hobbes hated tradition. He hated the common law. He wrote a whole book against it. Basically, Hobbes argued that traditions and religion, by the way, any attachment of someone to something that is not the sovereign, takes away power from the Leviathan, the ruler. And it is, in a way, it's anarchy. So basically, he said, you should throw away the common law, and you should throw away any church that is not the ruler's church, and so on and so forth. Another thinker, Sir Robert Filmer, is another kind of absolutist. So basically, all these thinkers were publishing things, and they had their followers. And people like Selden and other people in England find themselves on the defensive, trying to defend the old ways of common law against this kind of revolutionary thinking. And they also were starting to see that they were, on the one hand, they suspected that the king might find absolutist ideas appealing. Indeed, around the king, there were people that were saying, be an absolutist king. Don't be don't be tied down by traditions. And on the other hand, there started to be kind of revolutionaries that argued that we should set up a government according to Grotian rationalist ideas, and maybe we don't even need kings, but if we have kings, we can do without the common law. So, the great common lawyers had to address these problems. Now, most of them, let's say, replied to this challenge something like Sir Edward Coke. Sir Edward Coke was the greatest common lawyer of the generation before Selden. He was of the Elizabethan age, let's say, and he was very insular in his thinking. His argument was the common law is perfect for Englishmen. It's not fit for anyone else. It's a perfect fit between Englishmen and common law, and I don't care. Don't talk to me about other laws. So it's a kind of circular argument that it works for me, and I don't care about anything else. And some lawyers, actually in England, followed him. But the problem with this argument is that if larger segments of the population are becoming attracted by all these new ideas, rationalist ideas, absolutist ideas, the problem is that if you simply ignore them, they just grow and grow, and eventually you will be challenged by people who say, look, you're just clinging on to some old, old wives' tales or something like that. So the other answer to this challenge was John Selden's answer. And John Selden was the greatest common lawyer of his generation, meaning he's a generation after Coke. And Selden lived between, he was born in 1584 and he died in 1654, meaning he lived basically to the first half of the 17th century. He was an adult to the first half of the 17th century. And he was an exact contemporary of Grotius and Hobbes and Filmer. They were born apart. They were all born 4 years apart of each other. Some of them knew each other. All of them knew each other's writings. And so they were like, like one generation of thinkers debating things between them. Now, of course, I cannot go too much into each theory because unfortunately this lecture is not 5 hours long. So I will just put it in a schematic way, try to show you in a sense, I will describe like 4 schools of thought that are like, you will see that they're complementing because they each have an epistemological theory, a theory of how we know things, and upon this, they built their political and legal theory, and each theory fits, of course, the epistemological theory. Each political theory fits the political. So, I want to start by saying that the big question was, what is the relationship between the metaphysical or the world of ideas and the real world? Meaning, each of us have notions, ideas, theories, beliefs, whatever, and they are in our mind, and there's a real world around us. And what's the relationship between these two things? So, Hobbes argued the only real things are the material things. All our ideas that are unconnected with material things are phantoms. They may be true, they might not be true. We can never know anything about them. What can we know that is real is our senses. So he built a sense-based theory of knowledge. We know only what we can feel. We are afraid of being hurt or of dying. We want to feel pleasure, to feel safe. And so upon this the idea that everything is in the senses of the individual, it created a theory, a political theory that says what moves people is pain and pleasure, but the greatest pain is the fear of death. So he made this the basis for all his political theory. We are afraid of pain and death, and so this is the strongest power in the world. And upon this, I will create a political theory that will make all individuals follow it, because every theory that is bound, that is connected to ideas, values, beliefs, is in danger of falling prey to the rambling minds of various people. So Hobbes, in his autobiography, told the story that he was born in 1588. That was the year when the Armada came to England, tried to invade it. And his story was that his mother was pregnant, and she got the news of the Armada approaching England, and she was so scared that she gave birth to him prematurely. So he writes, fear and myself were born at that moment. And so his idea is basically that fear is the strongest motive for people to do what they're told. And his theory is basically that you have to have one power in the state, which is supreme, since unfortunately God does not rule us directly. He said that in the Bible you could have it where God directly ruled the people of Israel. In the desert, he went before them, and if they did something wrong, they were punished. Unfortunately, that's not the case at the moment. So we need a God on earth. And what is the God on earth? It's the Leviathan. In the Bible, the Leviathan is a kind of dragon, a monster. It's the strongest animal in the world. If you want, the T-Rex, okay, of the world. So Hobbes argued, since the fear is the strongest motive for people to be in line, we must make the ruler a Leviathan, a monster, that people will fear him, and then they will follow him. And so he defined the state itself as the Leviathan, and the state, by its power, will crush any dissent, and in this way, society will be peaceful. That is Hobbesian theory. It gets from a very individualistic basis. His basis is the individual that only cares about himself and wants to survive. And the question is, why such individuals would enter society to begin with, if everyone cares only about himself and he wants to survive? And his answer was, even the strongest man must sleep sometime. So he said, even if you're the strongest, sometimes you go to sleep, and someone who's weaker can take a rock and break your head. So eventually, men in the state of nature, they were like animals, but even they understood that they have to cooperate to survive. And so society started out of self-interest and fear of death. And this is the true structure of society. Hobbesianism, this is the basis of this kind of absolutism, starting with the individual and getting to an absolutist way of politics. As you can understand, Hobbesianism has many problems in explaining why should I fight for my country? Because maybe if I'm conscripted by the ruler, I'm afraid of dying. He's going to kill me, so I'm going to war. But if I go to a war and I see that the other side has more soldiers, why shouldn't I go over? Because one ruler is not like another, and I have no real loyalty to my own country other than fear. So if I fear the other side more, I should go over. So this is the problem with the Hobbesian theory. Another view is Filmer's. Filmer was an absolutist, but he started from an opposite concept than Hobbes. he argued that God, or rather, I'll start with his theory. His theory was that in this world, he was in a sense the opposite of Hobbes. He said, in this world, all our senses, all our knowledge is a world of lies, and we cannot really know anything. Even our feelings, things that we touch, we might be confused about it. What's the only thing that we can know? There are spiritual truth. He said, the truth of the gospel, that's the truth. That's the only truth that we can actually know. So in a sense, he's the opposite of Hobbes. Hobbes says the only real things are material things. He's a materialist. And all ideas, all notions are a fantasy. Filmer makes the opposite case. He says the Christian truth is the truth, and all material things are a lie. This world is a world of lies. The only truth is the next world. And this is, you can see that this is a very Christian notion. But Filmer brought it to the extreme. Basically, he argued that because of this, the only truth that we can be actually sure of is that God told us to listen to our superiors. So you should always listen to your father and your king, and the king is like your father. And whatever he tells you, you should do. Now, the question is, but what if he tells me to kill someone or to burn a church? I'm a good Christian. How would I do it? So Filmer said the duty of obedience is so strong that if your master, if your king, if your father tells you, go burn that church, you should do it. And then when you die and you come before God and God asks you, what have you done? Your answer should be, I follow the orders of my superior. And God will tell you, you go to heaven. And if that was right or wrong, I will judge your superior for it. That's an actual argument. He says basically he says there's no reason in the ever, there's no justification ever for defying an order. And the supreme Christian virtue is obedience. And the question is, what you do when you know absolutely, when you're absolutely sure that your ruler or your father, whatever, is wrong. For instance, if you live in the Roman Empire and the emperor is a pagan and he's killing Christians, he's not even a Christian, should you listen to what he says? So the most Filmer is able to concede is that you should adopt a passive resistance, meaning basically you should say no and sit down, and if he wants to kill you, let him kill you, not defy him, not rebel. If you can see, it's a kind of, he's taking an ultra-Augustinian view. It's a kind, his way of looking at the world is a kind of way with the Christian martyrs of the first generations, which were, a kind of extreme pacifism in this sense that he says there's never ever any justification for taking arms against a ruler. So, and he gets to this result from saying that our own reason is so unsure that we can never actually really know what's true and untrue. We can only know that Jesus Christ died for us. But you cannot know anything practical or political, and so every decision might be wrong. And then you would die, and God would say, why did you do that? And you say, I thought that A, B, C, D. And God will say, how come you thought that? You were wrong. Go to hell, right? So Filmer's theory is just listen to your superior always, and that's the way to heaven. Because even if you suffer every day of your life and all your children die, it doesn't matter, because you live 70 years of suffering. What's that before eternity in paradise? Okay, so it's as I can understand, it's the opposite of a material view. It's an anti-material view of the world. So this is the second theory. The third theory is Grotian, the Grotian individual rationalism. Grotius, like Hobbes, started from saying individuals are self-interested, but he argued that they are like rational machines, and also that because of this, they want to cooperate. They are not selfish monsters like Hobbes describes in the state of nature. They're actually good and they try to cooperate. Sometimes they go to war, sometimes they don't cooperate, but this is mainly because of misunderstandings. And so we actually can all get along. It's a kind of John Lennon. So according to Grotius, humans are like rational machines. And if they, basically, if I would sit in a room and think long enough, I will create the same set of laws for society, and I will decide what's right or wrong in the same way exactly as someone sitting in China in his own room and thinking about the same things. Because we are all like kind of computers. Yes, he might be Christian, and he might be an Italian, and he might be this, and he might be, but that's all the garnish. Basically, we all have this capacity for rational thought, and because of this, we are benevolent, and we want to be in society, and we want to cooperate in society. So according to Grotius' views, left to their own devices, humans produce societies, and in a sense, these societies, with time, will create a world society, either a world state or many states that cooperate together. So you can see how, in a sense, Grotius is the father of liberalism and of the UN. This way of thinking is basically, there's no real importance in countries, because every rational group will get to the same, more or less the same rational conclusion. We'll all create more or less the same rational laws, and so on and so forth. So from this theory of knowledge, which means that every individual within his mind has rational ideas, and since the world itself is built rationally, Grotius basically was an idealist. He said, my notions in my head are rational, the world is rational, so basically they fit together perfectly. So if I'm rational enough, I can make the world fit my rational ideas. And so it got even to the point, although Grotius protested maybe a bit too much that he was a Christian, he argued that even if you're not a Christian, and indeed, even if you're not, even if there is no God, that wouldn't matter to his theory, because he says rationalism is like 2 and 2 are 4. So everyone thinks like that. And indeed, even God cannot change these rules. That's what his argument. And so as you understand, he didn't say that explicitly, but we could say that in his mind, because God is rational and men are rational, in a sense, each of us thinks exactly in the important things, thinks exactly the same way as God does. The difference between us and God is that God has more power, but the rational process is the same. This is the argument. As you see, it's a kind of, well, I would call it self-idolatry, but it's a kind of thinking that says, that goes towards saying a rational individual can create the perfect world, because they can understand how the world is built, and eventually they will. And this is really the basis for liberalism. Now, with these 3 theories and various, sub-theories, Selden, he hears of these theories, and he basically writes his own defense of the common law against such theories. And most of all, he argued against the notion that a rational individual exists and that he is the same everywhere. And he argued that the way people think is so different between one person and another, not only between generations and nations and so on, but even you take one society, and even not only among the regular people, but even among the most intelligent people, he says philosophers are naturally should be the most rational beings in the world. And so at least philosophers should be those who can agree about things. And he said, so people like Grotius talk about right reason being the way we should, right reason should lead us. And he said, but I cannot find any group of philosophers that even agree about what the definition of right reason is. Meaning, you look at ancient philosophers, Greek philosophers, medieval philosophers, they disagree about everything. So clearly, the argument that rational thought is something that is accessible to any individual everywhere easily is simply untrue. You can see that it's untrue. So Selden said, this doesn't mean that there is no law and that there is no and rational thinking does not exist. But his idea was that these elements, every human endeavor, every human process is always limited. Our powers, our understanding are always limited. From this limited theory, he said, we have to understand that on our own, we can achieve very little. And all of our greatest achievements are based on generations and generations of tradition that, and he explained, for instance, who invented language? No one, or at least we don't know who it was, right? Now, how does language exist? There's no law about language. There's no committee that decides the language should be this way or that way. In some countries there is, but it doesn't work that way. And anyway, in England at that time there wasn't. So how does language work? Who owns the language, right? I mean, the way we think, each of us, is defined by the language we're thinking, right? Someone thinking in Chinese, someone thinking in English has a bit different notions about various things. This is obvious. So, and the language is, in a sense, like our national identity. It's a tradition. It's always changing, but it's also always the change. So he says, I can read text, English text, for hundreds of years ago. Clearly, the language has changed, but it's not another language. Simply, some words became obsolete, other continue, but it's still essentially the same. And these are important institutions. Human institutions are like this. And he liked to use the idea of the ship of state or the old building. There's this story about the Argonauts. That's a group of Greek seafarers, and Jason and the Argonauts went on with a ship and to a voyage that lasted 20 years. Now, during the voyage, every time some part broke down and they changed and then replaced it, so on and so forth. So after 20 years, they came back to their original port. At that point, every single piece of the ship had been changed along the way. So the question is this: is it still the same ship, although nothing of the original remains? And Selden argued it is, because the form, the content of the ship remains, although the specific parts have changed. And this was for him the metaphor for law, for the law. He says the English law and all law, we change with time, changes with time. But the fact that specific laws have been repealed and other laws are born and other laws are interpreted differently, it doesn't mean that the law is not built as one layer after the other. Certainly, this is how common law was built, and in a sense, also American law, which is a continuation. So Selden's theory, just to conclude this point, he argued, again, I don't have the time to go too much into it, but he argued that there is a universal natural law, but it is very minimal. He identified it with the 7 Noahide principles, which he argued that Jewish tradition and early Christian tradition recognized as 7 very, very broad principles. Basically, it's a non-Jewish version of the 10 Commandments. So those principles are like, for example, not to steal and not to kill, and so on and so forth. Now, but then he says, but actually, no society can be governed in this way, because in order to define what is theft, you have to define what is property, because of course you have to define that this is property, this isn't property. If I go on the beach and I take a rock, am I stealing? No, because no one owns it. So in this way, he argued that all societies are built on these 7 principles, but each develops its own version according to its own traditions. So there is a big difference between he says, it's like they could be a Moroccan sheep and a Scottish sheep. Both are sheep. But if you change the place, they die, because although they are both sheep, one is used to a certain weather and to certain circumstances and not the other. Similarly, the English law is perfect for the English because it developed in England, but it's not fit for French or, let's say, the laws of an island state are not the same as the laws of a confederation, and so on and so forth. As we can understand, he sees law, like language, like other tradition, as changing with time and fitting itself to the society, and society fits itself to its laws. So this is the view of Selden, and in this way he justifies the common law and Jewish law. He says this is the way Jewish tradition justified Jewish law, saying there is a universal law, but the Jews have their own specific laws built on them. In the same way that every just society, this was the argument of the Jews, of the wise men of the Talmud, every just society, French society, based on the same laws, the same 7 principles, will have its own laws, which are not the laws of the Jews. They are the laws of the French. As long as this society doesn't engage in cruel deeds and, like, I don't know, child sacrifice, which is against the principles, but these principles are very, very broad. As long as a society keeps these principles, it's a just society. In this way, Selden created a system where you have some kind of natural universal principle, but also just your traditional particular law is justified. So there we have this 4th system of let's say legal and constitutional, a legal and constitutional framework upon a epistemological or philosophical theory. And I like very much to give to make it simple, these 4 schools, by the example of the cookie and the glass of milk. Let's assume that this is a glass of milk and this is a cookie. So Hobbes would say the cookie is the material world, and the water or the milk is the world of ideas, the metaphysical world. So Hobbes would say the milk is poisoned, throw it away. Eat only the cookie. That's the only true thing. Now, of course, it's very dry, but that's reality. Filmer would say just the opposite. Look, the milk is true, drink it, and the cookie is poison, throw it away. I know you drink milk, you'll remain hungry because you didn't eat the cookie, but you know, what can you do? That's reality. Grotius would say the milk is real and the cookie is real, but actually they're the same thing. So you should put a cookie in the milk and shake them and then drink it together. It's disgusting, but that's reality. And then Selden will say, look, the cookie is real and the milk is real, but we can know only some things about the milk, okay? We know from tradition, from revelation, we know some things, but not everything. We are not God. We know some stuff. And the cookie, we know some things about the world, but not everything. So the way to go is to take the cookie, dip it in the milk a bit, and then you eat that bit which is inside. So maybe you can see which theory of the four I like. But of course, if you prefer to eat the cookie without the milk, it's up to you. So in this sense, these four schools, I believe, in a sense, from let's say the 1600s, are the foundations of all modern political thought. All modern political thought comes out of one of these four schools or some mixing of them. So basically, liberalism and rationalism come out of the Grotian school, and materialism, in a sense, utilitarianism and Hume come out of a version of the Hobbesian tradition, which is very skeptical, and so on and so forth. And naturally, traditionalism or conservatism, as we call it today, is continuing Selden's tradition. So Selden himself died when there was a civil war and revolution in England during the 1640s and 1650s. But after this period, when there was a restoration in 1660, two of Selden's students and disciples, one was the Earl of Clarendon, and Edward Hyde, later the Earl of Clarendon, and Sir Matthew Hale. They were two of the most important figures in the Restoration that basically restored the course of the old law and old politics in England, and which basically continues to this day. They were both Selden students and disciples, and this tradition, and including Selden and Hale, is one which eventually Edmund Burke grew from. So basically, this gives you a general picture of this pre-Burkean conservative tradition and how it developed. So that's it for me for now. And if you have questions, you're welcome to it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Haivry, for that really interesting lecture and great history. So yeah, we have time for questions. We can go for maybe about 15 or 20 minutes. And so if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Yeah, Alex, you can just go ahead and unmute. You don't
Okay, sure. Does this work?
Mm-hmm.
I hear you.
Cool. This is a crummy headset, but I'm glad it works. So one question I have is by the time we get to Edmund Burke, how would you describe between the other political traditions, what would you say would be the main ones, or how would you explain the French Revolution as a combination between Filmer, Hobbes? Where do you see that form of absolutism come in?
So I believe that the two main strains of liberal and leftist thinking came out of Hobbes and out of Locke. Out of Hobbes and out of Grotius. So Grotius basically was the foundation for Lockean liberalism that gave it its own. It has its own influence on French liberalism, but you have to remember that Hobbes also had a great influence, because from Hobbesianism there are two lines that came out from Hobbesian materialism and skepticism. One line was let's say what some people think is a moderate conservatism, which is Hume. Hume comes from this tradition, basically very skeptical about what we can know, very skeptical about human nature, and so on. And he's even skeptical about many material notions. But, many times Hume is described as one of the fathers of conservatism. Personally, I think that he's conservative in a small c meaning, but not really, because Humean skepticism mean you don't have any positive ideals that you strive for, because you don't know anything. You think any change might be dangerous. So you do rely on tradition, but you don't think that there are principles that are worth fighting for. So I'm always saying, if you are a Humean that lived in the Soviet Union in 1985, and this guy Gorbachev says, let's reform things, you would say, wait a minute, things might be bad, might get worse, and you'll be right. But such type of conservatism simply sees, you're always conserving what there is, irrespective of, you can never really work to better yourself. So this is very different from the Burkean and the Seldenian tradition. So there is this tradition coming from Hobbes, but the other tradition is at utilitarianism, which was very influential in France, Helvetius and other people, and even Rousseau was very influenced by Hobbes. So this whole line, I argue even later that Marx is a kind of Hobbesian, because Marx is a materialist, although he infuses his materialism with all kinds of ideas. So he's not an absolute Hobbesian, but he's in this tradition that believes that only the material things are the real things. So in a sense, the French Revolution was, it was born out of a mix of Lockean or Grotian or anyway, this Grotian tradition and this Hobbesian tradition, which Rousseau is in a sense the epitome. This mix of Grotian ideas. Now, one of the problems of liberalism in general and of the French Revolution in particular, it has these two ideas that are not really compatible. This materialist utilitarian tradition and the idealist Grotian Lockean tradition cannot really be together. Why? Because idealism basically argues that men are rational machines and they know better, and their mind will lead them to the right decision. And utilitarians see men as pleasure-seeking machines. That utilitarians say, I want to have less pain and more pleasure. That's what drives me, not some ideal. Now, of course, liberals try to argue that eventually things will combine, but they never do. And the strongest problem is that liberalism, because it's born out of these two different streams, has always a tension or even a conflict between, popular will is what the people want. Does popular will fit with some rational ideas? Will the will be rational or not? As we know, it's seldom rational, right? We know that many times the majority can decide to kill the minority. Liberals say, no, that won't happen, but actually it does happen many times. That is the big problem of liberals with democracy, right? That is the reason liberalism originally didn't like democracy at all. Why did French revolutionaries come to idolize Napoleon? Because they said, here finally we found a rational ruler. Now, actually, if we took all the rational people together, it will take a lot of time, and we assume that they will get to a rational decision. But actually, a rational decision is the same if one person took it and a million people took it. So if we have a rational ruler, why do we have to have a democracy? And the moment that they believed that Napoleon was a rational ruler, they created this liberal authoritarianism, which is still around.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for your answer. It makes a lot of sense. And I feel like you see that all over, that kind of in these totalitarian things, as you're talking about it, like with the Nazis too, and the whole kind of one leader, like true German democracy. Same kind of thing with Napoleon then.
Exactly. And by the way, in a sense, we can say that the ideals of Filmer eventually, I think that one branch of fascism actually sprang out from Filmer. Not Nazis, actually, because Nazis were very materialistic. Their ideas, their racist ideas were, right, where basically we can know everything about a person by his blood, by his race, whatever, and we can construct the world according to that. But Filmerian ideas were very much about the spirit. So fascism was Filmerianism without God, because for fascists, they believed that society should follow one ruler according to some spiritual ideal. And that is a kind of de-Christianized Filmerianism. That's my theory. Anyway.
Other questions? Yeah, James, go ahead.
Under the Seldenian view of law, he mentioned the thesis example of how law changes over time. But practically, how does that look? Is that the judges making decisions over time, or is that the people deciding to have new laws? How does that look?
That's interesting. First of all, remember that in the English system, the English system was always much more democratic than other systems because it has juries. And what are juries? Juries are, you take 12 people, right, from random people from the population, and you put them as the jury, and they are the ones who, at least in theory, decide if this guy is guilty or not. So, for example, there are periods where the king wanted to prosecute some people for things, and he prosecuted them, and the juries again and again found the people not guilty. So basically, you had a law that the king wanted to be passed, but there was no jury that would actually pass a guilty verdict on that law. So now judges know that, and so there's always that balance. So what I mean is the moment that you have that judges are not a separate case, but they are in the American system, they are elected one way or another, right? The judges are elected by some popular way of, so the judges are assumed to be a reflection in some measure of the popular will, not direct. It's not that I decide who's the judge today in this case, but the judges are not, they're not like, I don't know, Catholic priests being selected from above, and they're like, in a sense, like senators, right? You choose a senator every 6 years, so the judge has a longer term. But there were even those who said to begin with, at the time of the American Constitution, when it was written, that maybe senators should be for life. But so in the same way, in England too, the way the judges were selected, for instance, justices of the peace were not, in England, justices of the peace were not how do you call it, professional judges. They were eminent people that were chosen from the community, from the parish, from the county. So even the judge at that point was himself, he knew some law, but he wasn't a practicing lawyer. So you always have an interaction between the general, let's say that there's a period when there's a lot of unrest, a lot of murders, a lot of rape. Maybe at that point, the population feels that it should be a death penalty. And then there are a lot of more death penalties being, right, being decided. Then perhaps things change and the courts become more and more lenient. So in this way, statute law exists. But as we know, even in the US, certainly in England, the fact that we know very much that the fact that there are laws doesn't mean that the judges do not interpret the laws in certain ways, which are not at all the way they're written, such as, there is nowhere in the American Constitution, as far as I know, a right to privacy. So the judges interpreted the Constitution to say that there is a right to privacy. They say this section, so you see the interpretation of the law. No one said we should have another amendment and have the right to privacy in the Constitution. No one passed such a law. It's something that developed. So in this sense, it's always an interaction. There is a role for the law, but the Constitution, statute law, public opinion, and the impact on the legal decisions are always developing and changing. I hope that I answered the question.
Yes, that did. The interaction is as fascinating. As a follow-up, if I may, under a common law system, it seems, would it be a danger then for the judges, the class of people who are judges, to be separated from the people and no longer reflective of the people?
Yes, and first of all, naturally, yes. Certainly in the past, the judges were selected by the king in England. However, in England, the system is, as I said before, the Supreme Court in England is the parliament. There is, now there is, but there wasn't actually in England a Supreme Court. The Supreme Court were the law lords, and the parliament was the Supreme Court, if you want. You can even see some remaining in this is the judicial power of the Senate. You know that the Senate is, in theory, there is in America separation of power, but the Senate is a judicial institution, okay? Because when you have an impeachment of a president, or I think that also the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State can also be impeached. What does an impeachment entail? The lower house, the House of Representatives, impeaches someone, and then there's a trial. And what's the trial? Who's the judge? The judge from the Supreme Court, he sits at the head of the Senate, and who's the jury? All the senators. You know, I don't know how old you guys are, but there was an impeachment trial, or sort of, in for Bill Clinton, right? So if you look there, you see that there's a Supreme Court judge sitting at the head in the Senate, and the senators are the jury. So this Senate becoming a judicial body remains from the time that Parliament, the English Parliament, was the Supreme Court. And because of this, whatever the judges might decide, eventually the representative of the people can always go against that. So if the king selected, and this happened in Selden's time, the king selected again and again judges that were, ruling according to his wishes. And by the way, John Selden was denied bail and denied habeas corpus by judges selected by the king. So when he, after some time, after he was released and he was a member of parliament, he was one of the leaders of parliament in passing something called the Petition of Right. And the Petition of Right is a kind of judicial ruling by parliament, arguing that these judgments by these judges are null, and this is the law. So you understand, in the way, parliament, as the representative of the people, is always supreme to any judgment, because in the common law, parliament was understood as at the Supreme Court, actually. So the Supreme Court the judicial system can never be absolutely divorced from the people, because even if all the particular judges are, parliament itself is always representative of the popular will. So in that sense. And whoever wants to go more deep into this, you can read my very short book, just 500 pages on Selden, called John Selden and the Western Political Tradition. So.
Thank you.
All right, I think it's 8:35, and I think with a plug for your book, that might be a good place to end it on, and have people go further, unless there are any final questions that people are just dying to ask. All right. So, well, thank you again, Dr. Haivry, for your lecture and for taking.
Thank you for having me, and we succeeded in against all odds and against all Zooms in doing it. Thank you very much for bearing with me and suffering my English, which is not that good. So I hope you liked it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was great. Have a good night, everyone.
See you guys.